The day I fired the woman I loved was the hardest day of my life. She stood there, tears brimming in her eyes, believing I was destroying her career. But what she didn't know was that I was about to change her life forever. Because the moment I let her go as my assistant, I dropped to one knee and asked her to be my wife. Brothers, what I'm about to share will change how you think about love, timing, and taking the biggest risk of your life. If you've ever been afraid to tell someone how you truly feel, this story is for you. Watch out for these qualities because they just might lead you to the one. Before I dive in, click that subscribe button, like, and share this video, because what you're about to hear is deeper than you think. The day he fired the woman he loved was the hardest day of Marcus Hayes's life. The words came out colder than he intended, slicing through the quiet hum of his high-rise office. She stood there, stunned, tears glistening in her eyes, her fingers tightening around the files she had brought in for review. Claire thought he was ending her career. She thought all her hard work, the late nights, the loyalty she poured into his empire, was being thrown away with one ruthless command. What she didn't know, what Marcus had buried in the storm of his heart, was that he wasn't destroying her life at all. He was about to change it forever. Marcus Hayes had built an empire brick by brick, deal by deal. Born in the shadows of hardship, he clawed his way into wealth until his name alone made boardrooms pause and competitors tremble. But success came with a price. His penthouse was filled with silence, his dinners taken alone under the gaze of city lights, and his victories were celebrations with no one to share them. Women came and went, drawn to his wealth, dazzled by his power, but leaving him emptier than before. Love was a risk Marcus had long since buried, convincing himself that loneliness was safer than vulnerability. Then Claire walked in. She wasn't just another assistant in a long line of polished resumes. She had a spark, zealous, vibrant, unafraid to challenge him when his moods turned sharp. She carried herself with dignity, even when others underestimated her. She had laughter that broke through the tension of boardroom chaos and a determination that matched his own. At first, Marcus told himself it was admiration, then respect. But late nights working together, the way her eyes lit up when she solved a problem, the quiet strength she carried in her silence, it all began to chip away at the walls he had built. He remembered one night vividly. The office was empty, the city glowing beneath them, and Claire sat at the long oak table, organizing files. Marcus watched her, the curve of her brow furrowed in concentration, her hair spilling over her shoulders as she leaned into her work. Something inside him stirred, something that frightened him more than any business gamble ever had. He looked away quickly, forcing himself to bury the thought. She was his assistant. He was her boss. Lines like those weren't meant to be crossed. But the heart is a stubborn thing. Every day with her was a battle between what he felt and what he allowed himself to show. He caught himself studying the way she moved, listening for the cadence of her laugh, waiting for her to step into his office just so the silence could lift. He scolded himself at night for imagining more, but the fantasies grew stronger. He pictured dinners not as meetings but as dates, her hand sliding into his, her smile softening his world of steel. The breaking point came unexpectedly. A morning like any other, coffee steaming on his desk, the city roaring beneath the glass windows. Claire walked in, files in hand, wearing a look of determination. But it wasn't the paperwork that caught his eye. It was her spirit. She had gone above and beyond once again, defending one of his projects with a fierceness that stunned the entire board. As she spoke, Marcus realized he wasn't listening to the words. He was watching her, admiring her, wanting her, and in that moment, he knew he couldn't keep pretending. Fear gripped him. Love had no place in his world of control. It was unpredictable, messy, dangerous. But watching Claire, he understood something he had denied all his life. Loneliness wasn't safety. It was slow death. And if he let her slip away without telling her the truth, he would regret it forever. So he made a decision, one that shook him to his core. If he wanted her, if he truly wanted her to be more than an assistant, he had to erase the line between them. He had to take the biggest risk of his life. That morning, as she placed the files on his desk, Marcus's voice came out colder than he felt. "Claire, you're fired." Her face went pale. Shock hit her like ice. She blinked, as if she hadn't heard him right. "Fired?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "After everything I've done for you?" Her eyes shimmered with tears, and Marcus's chest clenched. He wanted to reach for her, to explain, but he stayed silent, fighting the chaos inside him. He watched her shoulders shake, her lips quivering as she tried to hold back the flood of emotions. To her, this was betrayal. To him, it was the only way forward. The room felt like it was collapsing. Her tears sliced through him like knives. Every second stretched like an eternity. Then, before fear could steal his courage, Marcus stood. He walked around the desk, every step echoing like thunder in the silence. Claire stared at him, confused, wounded, lost. Then he dropped to one knee. Her gasp filled the room. The files in her hands slipped and scattered across the floor. Marcus reached into his pocket, pulling out the velvet box he had carried for weeks, waiting for this moment. He opened it slowly, his voice breaking as he spoke. "Claire, I'm not firing you to end us. I'm firing you because I can't keep you as my assistant. I want you as my wife." The tears in her eyes spilled over, but now they were mixed with shock and disbelief. Her hand flew to her mouth, her breath coming in ragged gasps. What did you just say?" Marcus's own heart thundered in his chest. "I've been a fool all my life, hiding behind work, hiding from love. But you've changed me. You've shown me there's more to life than contracts and profit. I don't want you in my office, Claire. I want you in my life. Forever." The room swirled with silence. The city lights shimmered outside as if the whole world held its breath. Claire's tears fell freely now, her knees trembling as she looked down at the man who had just torn her career apart only to offer her something far greater. She knelt beside him, her sobs breaking into a laugh. You fired me to marry me?" she whispered. "Yes," Marcus breathed, his voice raw. "Because I don't need an assistant anymore. I need a partner. I need you." Her hands shook as she touched the ring, her lips curving into a trembling smile. "Yes," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Yes, Marcus. I'll marry you." In that instant, the loneliness of Marcus Hayes's empire shattered. For the first time in his life, he felt alive. He had taken the greatest risk, and it had given him the one thing his billions never could: love. The moment Claire said yes, Marcus felt as though the air in the room shifted. The skyscrapers that had loomed outside his windows for years no longer felt like cold glass and steel, they felt like witnesses to something that would change his life forever. For a heartbeat, the empire he had built didn't matter. His power, his wealth, his endless work, all of it paled compared to the woman kneeling before him, tears in her eyes and a trembling smile on her lips. But the world outside his office walls was not ready to let this love live quietly. The news spread faster than Marcus imagined. A billionaire CEO firing his assistant only to propose to her. It was fuel for gossip blogs, newspapers, and social media. Headlines blared. CEO risks empire for love, and assistant becomes fiancé in corporate scandal. Some painted it as a romantic fairy tale, but others twisted it into suspicion. Whispers about Claire's intentions grew louder. She was just waiting for the payout, some sneered. Gold digger, others muttered. For Marcus, the words burned, but for Claire, they cut deep. She had fought her whole life to be respected, to be seen for her intelligence and work ethic. Now, people were reducing her to a stereotype, tearing at her dignity with every passing headline. She sat with Marcus one evening in his penthouse, her hands shaking as she scrolled through her phone, reading comments that branded her a fraud. Tears welled in her eyes, but she fought to hold them back. "They don't know me, Marcus," she whispered, her voice cracking. "But it feels like they're ripping me apart anyway." Marcus cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. His eyes blazed with fire. Let them talk. Let them speculate. They don't know who you are. But I do. I know the woman who stayed late, who never asked for recognition, who carried herself with dignity even when no one noticed. I know the woman I fell in love with, and that's the only truth that matters. Still, the pressure mounted. Even within his own empire, there were those who doubted. Board members questioned his judgment, worried that personal feelings would blur business decisions. Old rivals seized the opportunity to mock him publicly, calling his move reckless. Marcus could feel the weight pressing down, but every time he saw Claire's face, every time he held her hand, his resolve only hardened. Their engagement became a storm, both thrilling and terrifying. Nights were filled with stolen moments of laughter and intimacy, as if they were creating a world of their own against the odds. But days brought endless scrutiny. Paparazzi followed them, flashing cameras in their faces whenever they stepped outside. Claire, who once blended quietly into the background, was now thrust into a spotlight she never wanted. One evening, at a charity gala Marcus had hosted for years, the whispers became venom. Dressed in an elegant gown, Claire stood proudly by Marcus's side. But she could hear the snickers, the backhanded compliments dripping with malice. She played her cards right, someone muttered. From secretary to billionaire's bride, what a leap. Claire's smile faltered, her heart pounding as the words sank in. Marcus noticed. He had always been attuned to her moods, her quiet strength. He tightened his grip on her hand, then, without hesitation, he pulled her toward the stage. The crowd murmured, confused, as he signaled for the microphone. The room fell silent. With Claire at his side, Marcus looked out at the sea of faces, businessmen, socialites, rivals. His voice cut through the silence, powerful and unyielding. Many of you know me as a man who built an empire. You've seen me rise, seen me fight, seen me win. But what none of you know is the price of that success. I built walls so high around myself that I forgot what it meant to live. I forgot what it meant to love. And then Claire walked into my life. He turned, his gaze locking onto hers. She is not my assistant anymore. She is my future. She is the reason I finally understand what real success looks like. And if anyone doubts her worth, they doubt me. The crowd shifted, uncomfortable, some clapping reluctantly, others too stunned to react. But Claire's eyes filled with tears, not from pain this time, but from pride. He had chosen to fight for her, not just in private but in front of the world. When they returned home that night, Claire wrapped her arms around him, her voice breaking against his chest. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, Marcus said fiercely. Because love isn't just whispered in the dark. It's shouted in the light, no matter who's listening. But their battles were far from over. The closer their wedding drew, the louder the storm became. Investors threatened to pull out, tabloids printed lies, and anonymous letters arrived at Claire's door warning her to walk away. Every day felt like a test, every moment a question of whether love could withstand the fire. Yet in the midst of the chaos, their bond only grew stronger. Marcus, once a man who hid behind contracts and control, now wore his vulnerability like armor. He let Claire see his fears, his doubts, his unspoken wounds. And in return, she gave him strength he never knew he lacked. Together, they carved out a sanctuary, a love that no rumor, no headline, no whisper could destroy. Still, beneath the passion and defiance, one truth remained: the world would not stop testing them. And Marcus knew that the real trial, the moment that would decide everything, was still coming. The closer the wedding day came, the heavier the storm pressed against them. Marcus had always believed the fiercest battles of his life were fought in boardrooms, across long tables where millions were at stake. But nothing compared to the invisible war that surrounded him now. Every morning, newspapers blared with fresh poison. Billionaire blindsided by gold digger assistant. Empire at risk. Caldwell Associates questioned Marcus Hayes's judgment. On television, So-called experts debated his decision as if love was a business move to dissect. And Claire, always composed, carried the bruises of those words on her spirit. One night she sat on the edge of their bed, her gown still draped from the gala they had attended, her back trembling as she tried to hold in sobs. Marcus stood at the window, fists tight at his sides, staring out at the city that now felt like an enemy. He turned when he heard her breath hitch. She buried her face in her hands, whispering, "I can't keep being the reason they attack you. I love you too much to destroy what you've built." Marcus knelt in front of her, lifting her hands away from her face. His voice thundered with passion. "Destroy what I've built? Claire, you are what I've built toward. Every deal, every victory, every lonely night, it all led to this. Without you, it's all meaningless." His words shook with conviction, and Claire looked into his eyes and saw not the billionaire the world gossiped about, but a man stripped bare, ready to fight for her no matter the cost. The war reached its boiling point when Marcus's board called for an emergency meeting. In a room filled with gray suits and sharp gazes, they sat across from him like a jury ready to deliver a sentence. Their spokesman cleared his throat. "Mr. Hayes, your engagement has created instability. Investors are nervous. Partners are questioning your judgment. We must advise you to reconsider this marriage, for the sake of the company." The room stilled. Marcus felt the old instinct rise, the one that once made him listen, bend, even compromise. But he had Claire's face burned into his mind, the woman who had stood by him, who had given him life beyond numbers and profits. He rose slowly, his voice calm but fierce. "Gentlemen, let me remind you what this company is. It is not built on fear. It is not built on public opinion. It is built on risk. Every empire I've created, every victory I've claimed, came because I dared when others trembled. And now I dare again. Not in business but in life. If you cannot accept the woman I love, then you cannot accept me. And if that is the case, you can find yourselves another empire to cling to." The silence after his words was deafening. Faces shifted, some pale, some tight with disapproval, but none dared to speak. Marcus turned and walked out, leaving behind the echo of his defiance. For the first time, he didn't care what they thought. The empire would stand or fall, but his love for Claire was unshakable. The wedding day arrived like a sunrise after a long storm. Cameras lined the streets outside the church, reporters clamoring for a glimpse, doubters waiting for a scandal. But when Marcus stood at the altar, dressed in a black suit that gleamed under the lights, and Claire walked down the aisle in a gown that shimmered like starlight, the noise of the world fell away. Gasps rippled through the crowd, not because of the spectacle, but because of the truth that radiated between them. As she reached him, her hand trembling in his, Marcus felt the weight of the years he had spent alone crash against the joy of this moment. The vows they spoke were not polished speeches but raw, unfiltered promises. "I once thought love was a weakness," Marcus confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "But you showed me it's the only strength that matters. Today I don't just gain a wife. I gain a life." Tears streamed down Claire's cheeks as she whispered, "You saw me when others dismissed me. You loved me when the world mocked me. I don't need their approval. I only need you." The words sealed them more tightly than any contract ever could. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Marcus kissed her with a passion that shook the air, the crowd erupted, not just in applause but in stunned silence turning to cheers. Even the harshest critics could not deny what burned before them. Later that night, in the quiet of their home, Marcus sat with Claire curled against his chest. The city lights flickered outside, but for once, he didn't see them as walls of glass. He saw them as witnesses to his transformation. His empire was no longer cold stone and steel, it was the warmth of the woman in his arms. He whispered softly, more to himself than to her, "Never shut out love. It finds you when you least expect it." Claire lifted her head, her eyes glistening with tears and joy. "And when it does, it changes everything." Marcus kissed her forehead, the fire of defiance still burning in his chest but now tempered with peace. He had risked everything, faced humiliation, stared down betrayal and doubt. And in the end, he had gained something far greater than the empire he once worshipped. He had gained love. Real, raw, unshakable love. The world could whisper all it wanted. Their story was no longer theirs alone. It was a testament, a warning, and a promise all at once. Love cannot be silenced, cannot be calculated, cannot be denied. And Marcus Hayes, the man who once hid behind wealth and power, had become its loudest witness. Now tell me, would you have taken the same risk? Would you fire the woman you loved just to ask her to be your wife? Before you go, smash that subscribe button, hit like, and share this story, because the next one I'm about to tell will leave you questioning just how far love, betrayal, and destiny can really go.